If you use Line 6 Helix and you're generally overwhelmed with setting it up, or you have trouble getting your own tones, or even you're just tired of buying third-party patches that other people have made, then this video is going to be for you. Today I'm going to be programming my Line 6 Helix Floor completely from scratch, so I have a brand new preset. I'm going to walk you through how to craft a tone that you love, and then how to set up all of the buttons and snapshots and all of that kind of stuff so it's ready for performance. This video turned out to be pretty long as I was editing, so I decided to make it a two-part series. Part 1 is going to cover all the basic setup, input settings, amp and cab options, how to load an IR, plus overdrive, compression, and EQ. Part 2 is going to cover any sort of modulation, time-based effects, DSP management, and then stomps and snapshot setup. Along the way, I'm also going to mention all the tips and tricks and little things that might make life a little easier for you when you're setting it up. If that all sounds good, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'm going to get started. For this video, I'm going to be demonstrating on the Line 6 Helix Floor, but you can feel free to use whatever Helix product you have. A lot of the knowledge is interchangeable, and once you know how to set up one device, all of the Helix devices are very similar. You just have a different configuration of buttons and knobs. Also, to make your life easier, I would recommend downloading the free HXEdit software. I have it running on my computer over here, so throughout the video I'll be popping over and doing some stuff over there because it's just easier than navigating with this. But that's not required. Again, you can do everything just on this device. If you've never used Helix before, like you're completely new to it, what you need to focus on first is the little screen that you have here, and you have some lines with dots on either end. This is your signal flow. So almost always it's going to come in right here at the top and it'll say input, and then it goes from left to right like you're reading a book. Whatever order your pedals or effects or blocks or whatever you're using, whatever order they're in up there is the order that the sound is going to pass through. So if you're a pedal board person, like real pedals person, that's how you set up your signal flow. Like I want to go overdrive into chorus into delay. That's how you do it, is setting it up from left to right. As you move over, you'll see a little block, little square, and you have a bunch of slots for these. And then when you get to the end here, this is the output. So from here, you can either route it out to your amp or to front of house or whatever, or if you're on a Helix LT or a Helix Floor, you can set this to route down to your second row. So only on those bigger flagship products do they have a second row that you can program additional effects on. The Stomp and the XL, you just have one row, one line of DSP. If you have any questions about DSP, go ahead and ask them in the comments. I've done deep dives on how to save DSP and all of that, so I'm happy to help in that area. Before you do anything else, go to your input block and make sure that it's set up how you want. So the first thing we're going to see here is input gate, and if you don't know what this is, it's basically going to cut out any sound that's below a certain volume. I would strongly recommend using the input gate because it's going to help clean up your tone when you're not playing and just eliminate all of that like buzz kind of thing. You'll still have buzz when you're playing, but you won't be able to hear it because you're playing. To turn on the gate, go ahead and grab this first knob here, or whatever is corresponding to your input gate, and switch it to on. That will enable these next two parameters, threshold and decay. So threshold is at what level is your guitar signal attenuated or turned down. So anything below minus 48 dB. So as you can see on this gain reduction meter right here, it's currently gating out my guitar. So if I play super soft, like I'm hardly touching the string, it's not opening the gate enough, which means my threshold is too high. It's getting rid of those quiet notes. And then when I play a little louder, then it starts to cut through. But I want no chance of a note being cut off, so I'm gonna pull that threshold down. I'm gonna go ahead and pull it down to maybe minus 56. Basically, you wanna find the sweet spot between it's cutting out your noise, but allowing even your most dynamically quiet playing to cut through. So that's a good spot right there, because any level I pluck the strings, the gate is opening and letting the sound come through. And then I would recommend turning this decay down. Decay is basically how quickly the gate closes after you stop making sound. So if you have a really slow decay, it's going to take a while to turn back down and make your sound quiet. So I usually like a shorter decay. That way it quickly just gets the noise out of there. And you can always adjust this to taste as you go. I just like to get it set up as I start, and then as I move through and make new presets, I'll just copy what I did. So already before we even touch any sort of DSP, we're cleaning up our guitar signal. On the guitar Z in, this is just what kind of impedance on your guitar. I'd recommend just keeping that on auto. And then for guitar pad, I have it set to global, but the guitar pad is like if you're using an active guitar and want to pad it down so it's not hitting the input too hard, you can do that. But I've just got good old passive Strat here, so I leave mine on global and have it off. If you're like me, you might be tempted to just start putting all the effects, all the sounds, but I would ask you refrain from that and just focus on getting a good amp and cab sound first, because if your amp and cab sound doesn't sound good, nothing else is gonna sound good. There's a few different options for amp and cab depending on the level of complexity and the level of control you want. The simplest way to do it is by going into the menu here and going down to amp and cab. So you have Amp+Cab, you have amp, you have preamp, and you have cab. So amp and cab is going to be, just as it says, an amp and a cab, like as a package deal. Like if you go buy a combo amp at Guitar Center, you get an amp and a cab in one thing. That's what that is. Now you can still go through and independently tweak each one. So if you want to change the amp but keep the cab the same, or change the cab, you can do that. Depending on what you're looking at, I'll bounce back and forth between HX Edit and this, but you have all of your amp controls down here now: drive, bass, middle, treble, presence, channel volume. If you page over, you have more options, more like advanced stuff. You've got your master, sag, hum, ripple, bias, bias X. And then if you page over one more time, and this might be different if you're on a stomp or something, but if you page over one more time, you'll see this little icon switch from the amp to a little speaker. And now all of your tweaks are affecting the speaker. So you've got mic, position, distance, all of that kind of stuff. If you don't know what you want as far as mics and positioning and that kind of stuff, I recommend you just leave it alone. The fine people at Line 6 have already dialed this in to be a good starting point. So if you don't have that engineer brain, it's totally okay. Just, I recommend leaving it as is. But if you really want to dig in and go for it, by all means, tweak away. But for the sake of not overwhelming yourself, I would leave that alone. Now we've got I pulled up the US Princess, which is a Princeton style amp, and it's matching cab. So now we have an amp sound. So sounds really good. And from here, I would keep tweaking the amp and the cab until you get like your sound. And then everything we add on top of that is going to be like gravy on your mashed potatoes. If you want to change the cab within the Amp+Cab block, just go over to the cab half and press in on your little selector knob here. And this is going to take you to a cab menu. And then you can scroll through, pick a different cab. Let's do the 112 Bluebell, like the Vox style cab. Still the Princeton amp, but we've switched to the Bluebell cab. Another note is that if you're low on DSP, go for the amp and cab block. It's going to keep it a lot lighter and a lot simpler. And for those of you like Stomp or Stomp XL people, you're going to want to keep your amp and cab to a single thing so you have room for all your other effects. The next level of amp cab, if you want a little bit more functionality, is to actually separate the amp and the cab block. So for this, I'm going to go back over, but just go to amp this time, guitar, and I'm going to go down Princeton. Princess is my favorite because that's the kind of amp I actually have. So I'll pick the Princess. And then if you just pick amp, it's going to sound terrible. You need that cab to balance out everything. So just go to your next block and go down to cab. And you could either do a single cab or a dual cab. If you do dual, you can pick two different cabs or have the same cab with different mics, different positioning. So if you had a guitar rig where you were like running ahead to two different style cabs on either side of the stage, mic'd up whatever way, this is where you'd start to dial that in. You can pick a dual cab and get things set up that way. But I'm gonna stick with single cab for now and just go back to the US Princess. And now we have two separate elements. This is cool if you want to move things around at all. So sometimes I like to put the cab at the very end of my chain and then have some time-based effects in between the amp and the cab, almost like an effects loop kind of thing, but all built in. Because some of the effects add some artifacts and digital high-end and stuff that you wouldn't hear in a normal amp because all of those are running into a speaker that's filtering the sound down. If you have any questions about that, like I'll talk about it for days, but to get like the realest sound, you need to watch out for those super highs. But that's a whole nother thing we'll get into. If you want to use an IR, like you bought a third-party IR pack, I have a few that I really like. You're going to switch out your cab for an IR block. So go back over, back over, back over, and then right below cab, you'll see this little magenta colored option called IR. So you press that. Same thing, you can do single or dual. I don't personally know the difference between 1024 and 2048. I usually just do 2048 because I assume it's higher resolution. If you need to know that, you probably do know it. Otherwise, just pick one. So if you go over to Helix Native, you'll see basically a tab for presets, a tab for IRs, and a tab for favorites. If you want to use IRs, just drag them right from your hard drive into this IRs section. And then however you arrange them in here is how the IR loader is going to find them. So like this, G10 greenback, low gain, all the close mics plus room and mono. That's what I think I want. So I'll go ahead and pick that one. But you can go through and pick whatever you want. I'd recommend right away turning your low cut up to about 80, because from an audio engineer perspective, a guitar amp doesn't really make anything below 80 anyway. And then if you're ever being mixed by a front of house engineer, sound guy, whatever you want to call him, he's going to cut everything below 80 anyway. So I just like to go ahead and cut it on my end, and that keeps things cleaner all the way down the line. The other thing I'll tell you about Helixes after having mixed them for like 4 or 5 years live is the part that makes it sound fake. You know, when everyone's like, oh, it's so like harsh and digital, that's top end above like 8K to 12K. So if you really want it to feel warm and real, start pulling this high cut down to at least 12K, but you can pull it down even further if you want a more like low fidelity kind of sound. Just find that sweet spot where it really sounds how you want it to. So if we turn it off, you hear a lot of that kind of fizzy, harsh, icy top, I guess you can call it. And then if I pull it down to somewhere around 9K, it just like subtly warms it up. And so this is just going to help it feel more real. And I'd recommend playing with that low and high cut and just getting it where it sounds the most real to your ears. Like depending on the amps and cabs and guitars you're using, it's going to be different, but I would strongly recommend dialing that in because that's going to get rid of that like fake digital sound. From there, I like to add a compressor. I do this at the very beginning of the chain, like the very first thing that I'm going to hit. So go there, go down to dynamics. And my favorite one, it just has the best response to me, is the Ampeg Opto Comp. And you can play around and find what you like best. I personally like having a compressor on almost everything, unless I'm doing like a really vintagey tone, I won't use it, or a really high gain tone, I won't use it. Reason being, vintagey tones, they don't usually have that sound. And high gain tones, if you're compressing too much, you're just gonna add more noise floor. Plus, when a guitar is distorted at that level, it's already compressed, it's just a solid block of sound, so you don't need a compressor. But for anything kind of in between, like country or pop or funk, I love having a compressor. It just tightens it up and adds more punch. One of my favorite things to do on like a guitar style compressor is to pull the mix down. So I'll usually go to like 75%. This means 25% of your original sound is gonna come through, and then the rest, the other 75, is gonna be compressed. So it just helps to balance it out even more. And I also like to use the compressor to hit the front end of the amp harder. So this is where I'll really dial in like what my baseline level of grit is. So if you just push this level up, I went up one whole number, it's gonna hit the front end of the amp harder and give you more overdrive. That sounds great so far. From there, you can start to add overdrives if you want, or go ahead and skip to time-based effects, whatever you'd like. I'll go ahead and start on overdrives though. And my best approach for overdrives is stacking. So if you're into any like pop or CCM, like Christian music especially, they stack overdrives all the time. And it's counterintuitive the way you need to set it up. If you're going from left to right, you would think, okay, my first overdrive, and then my second, and then my third, and it goes in this way. But what you would actually want is your first overdrive to be the last one in the chain. And this is going to preserve the color of that overdrive. So whatever you like the sound of, if you like the sound of a clone, put it at the end of your chain of overdrives, and then all your other overdrives are gonna push into that last one, and you're gonna retain the sound of that last one. So I'm gonna start closest to my amp, and I like the clone, so I'm gonna start with that. It's called the Minotaur in here. I don't really like that, so I'm gonna start to just scroll through different ones until I find kind of what feels best with this combination. So I really like that Heir Apparent. That's like a King of Tone one. So I'm gonna keep that, but just go ahead and bypass it and find some other overdrives that I like. It's kind of like your overdrive shopping, like you're going up to the buffet and trying out different ones and seeing what sounds good where you're at. One thing that's actually bothering me about the amp sound so far is there's this like ringing around, I want to say like 3K. So I'm going to go ahead and add an EQ and get rid of that. So right after my IR, I'm going to press here, go into EQ. I'm going to go into the parametric EQ, and I like the parametric EQ because it has Q or width controls. So instead of it just a bell and you go up and down, you can make it more narrow or more wide and really add or subtract the exact frequencies you want. So for mid frequency here, I'm gonna go ahead and boost it up a good like 5 dB so I can hear, and then I'm gonna turn up the Q pretty high as well. And then this is called sweeping, so I'm gonna take the mid frequency and just twist through the frequencies until I hear that, like what's bothering me, and then I'm gonna take it out. I think right at 3.2 I'm not a fan of, so I'm going to pull that down about 1.5 dB. Sorry, that's just me being a nerdy audio guy. I didn't like how that was sounding. So back to overdrives, keep playing around and swapping some out. If you only need one, that's great. I usually end up using 2 or 3. So it's a little loud, it's a little bright, so I'm going to pull the level and tone down. So for my next overdrive, I have the compulsive drive right now, but I'm not sure if I am going to end up liking that. No, I don't like that. The Scream 808's a classic one. That's like your tube screamer, mid-boost sound. I'm also a fan of the Stuper OD, which is like a super overdrive Boss style. That one's like a little brighter, not quite as mid-hump as the Scream 808 tube screamer. So again, for your overdrives, it's super taste driven. Like you might not like how this sounds, but That's how I know I want to sound when I'm in a mix with a band. So that's basically just how to find the overdrives you like. Just click through a bunch of them, find ones that are close, and then tweak them. And then as far as stacking, if you're gonna stack, put your lowest gain overdrive at the end of the chain and use your higher gains to push that, assuming you want the sound of that one. If you're not stacking overdrives, just slap an overdrive on there, turn it on, turn it off, you're good. Thanks for watching part 1 of my Helix setup video. Comment down below and let me know what the most helpful part was to you. Be sure to check out part 2 when it comes out. I'll have it down in the description, but also make sure you subscribe so you're notified when the video comes out.